to shape change in the mutagenic pool and drown with friends again and again. Welcome to A Mutant Manifesto, Episode 5. Today we'll be talking about C.H.U.D, the movie from 1984. There's lots of different themes and sort of archetypes that this movie introduces to the podcast here, as far as like filmic representations of the mutant. And it also has a lot of different tendrils and connections to a lot of different things. Like the homelessness crisis, sort of like political negligence, the idea of like toxicity as a connective force. But before I sort of introduce what exactly I find interesting about this movie, I want to introduce the guests. Well, I've got Josh on, co-host Josh. We know him, we love him.
Yo.
We also have Lucas Murphy, who is a longtime friend of mine as well, and also a horror screenwriter, has a short film, You Can't Talk to the Dude, which is out soon. There's a really good preview for it. And, it's like an upcoming short film. And also is the editor of Cusper Magazine in Los Angeles, based out of Los Angeles. They just released their second edition. I've got a schizo essay in the first one. And the third, they're taking submissions for the third one as well. So look up Cusper Magazine. Lucas, welcome to A Mutant Manifesto.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
How have y'all been this week? Anything you want to bring up from your own personal lives or anything? Or anything you've been like thinking about? I mean, the debate happened, which was like truly amazing.
Yeah.
But I mean, everyone's talking about that all the time anyway, so.
Man, talk about mutants, the two of them.
I mean, seriously.
Yo.
It really did. It really aroused. I was like talking with my grandma, who is she's got like Alzheimer's, and like, it's a similar feeling, like talking to her, like being there with her, as like watching that debate. It's just is like this kind of like, you feel, it feels so disturbing, in such a weird way, but also kind of arouses your sympathy in an interesting way too. Like, I'd never thought I would have sympathy for that motherfucker, but also it's like, I mean, you can't help but feel kind of, you feel that your heartstrings
definitely
a little bit going.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience of like, I watched a little bit of it the night of, and then I read a lot of like the analyses of it, and then I actually sat down and watched like a good chunk of it like 2 days later, and I was like, it was so much worse than I had pictured. Even like actually literally just watching both of them, like their actual faces were so disturbing, and like, I don't know, Biden felt so inhuman, like truly like reptile person, like out of here. And yeah, I had sympathy, but I was also just like, how could anyone talk to this person and then put them on that stage like that? I told my friend yesterday, I was like, literally you just have to watch his walk to the podium, and that's all you need to know about how it's gonna go.
Yeah, like on that same point, it's like he doesn't have real friends. If they let him run, right, you know what I mean? Like someone should be telling him, hey man. And of course the reporters after the debate are saying, what's gonna happen? Are you gonna not run? And you see these flip-floppy things where it says, oh, he talked to someone saying like what did he say? An ally, a special ally saying that he wasn't going to run. And then suddenly he and Kamala are back at it. Like they've got 2 more chances and they're really doubling down. And it's like, come on, someone's really got to be there. Jill needs to say, look, hubby, it's time,
Yeah. Just to tie it kind of into the like narrative of this podcast as it's going, I mentioned this like, I don't know. Have y'all ever had the experience of like being tripping or something, and then you catch a whiff of the news, or like, have you ever had the experience of like,
drugs?
I've never. During like some of my most consequential, life-altering trips, the figures of Biden and like Trump came into my awareness, and
Whoa.
and that is such a bad trip. Like that is so not nice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I think it just ties into like the inhuman, like disturbing quality of like looking at these motherfuckers. It just is like makes you feel uncomfortable. But yeah, it's like this, and I feel like it ties into the QAnon sort of like these guys must be wearing masks or must be shapeshifters or must be lizards. Like this feeling like these people can't be human. It's an interesting way that like the mutant emerges as like a political, like the puppet of the politician. And that's another example of how the mutant isn't just low but is also like high. Or like in places of power as well as like subterranean.
Also, I think tying it into this movie we're about to discuss, there's also something about just like the horror of the bureaucracy of, I read this one analysis where it was like, probably why this happened is there wasn't anyone specifically assigned to analyzing if Biden was up for the debate. It's like, it's one of these things where it's like, it's not even a conspiracy. It's just that like, the bureaucracy of these places works in such ways to make it inhuman that like no one is like actually thinking through these decisions because everyone's so micro-focused on their little, kingdoms.
And even that like personal relationship with Jill, it's like, well, like maybe there's not even that time to like, or I don't know, like the incentive of the marriage might very well, it just like points out, like Josh said, that there's like that even she is not a true friend in the way, right? Like she must have been aware of this. So like, what does that say about the relationship between those two?
Yeah.
Well then, so getting a little bit into what I find interesting about CHUD a little bit. I want to kind of like set a couple like probing theses out, and maybe if y'all have any sort of to add to, we can do that, and then we'll just sort of go through the movie kind of like loosely beat by beat and continue to sort of like pull it apart and discuss it. My main interest here is like this idea of taking a look at like the subterranean America, what is below America, the things that are like below recognition, but then are influenced by negligence, like political negligence. But then there are sort of three protagonists of this movie that we'll get into. But to me, they sort of outline three different sort of ideals for like the like white male American, like three different like hopeful ideals that this director seems to have in mind, or this writer or director. There's the liberal artist who's like kind of trying to like highlight issues with his art, but is also kind of aloof and like cool. And then there's the problematic cop, but who is like heart is in the right place ultimately, and he's like trying to do the right thing, kind of, but only because he has like personal stakes in it. And then finally there is the like man of the people preacher who's like radical there, trying to like has the soup kitchen, is trying to like be of the people, but is like a crazy hippie in a way, is kind of like so extreme that he loses connection to the above ground world a little bit, and like isn't seen as serious by them. So my question kind of is like, how do these three figures motivate us as viewers watching this 80s movie today? And then also like, how does the limitedness of the scope of the movie, there's like barely any people of color that speak. It definitely does not pass the Bechdel test. So how does that limitedness, it tries to like be kind of like a political movie. It tries to sort of like represent something. But so like, where does that succeed and where does it fall short for us as like viewers today, or just like us three? And then also like, what does it mean? What do we make of the CHUDs? These like orc like mutants, and and like what are they, and how can we understand them as figures, and what it says about what their departure from humanity tells us about today's world as well. One quick note as well. Did you guys know that the word "chud," like that, like lefties use the word "chud" to like describe like fascists? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard it, yeah.
If you're like an anarchist or like a lefty, then if there's like a guy who like loves cops or like has like a thin blue line like sticker on his car, you call him a chud. And I actually did not realize that came from this movie. They were like, and actually the reference was developed by Chapo Trap House apparently. I had no idea about that, but it's kind of funny that like for me I had heard the word chud, but I didn't think it was actually connected to this movie. So it's kind of interesting to kind of do that. Like it's only the 80s. It's not that long ago, but it already has that like connection.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that was really interesting to me is just like, yeah, the term chud is so much bigger than this movie in the sense that like I don't know, like the idea of chud, like I was reading like so many other TV shows and movies have referenced chud, and like the terminology has like really lived beyond the film, and I thought that was really interesting, particularly because in the movie the term itself also takes on this like weird resonant meaning that I thought was like very strange and got me confused. Definitely one of the things that I was really interested in is like, yeah, what are the CHUDs? And like, what actually, like, particularly I was interested in the word cannibal, because I was like, are they human? Is it cannibalism? What actually have they become? And particularly, did the government create them in some way? So I was like very interested in that.
Yeah, and the acronym itself actually revolves and reorients during the movie. Like the characters in it understand the acronym differently as the movie goes on as well.
Another thing, I mean, we're going to talk about it a lot, I'm sure, but I was like, I thought maybe the most interesting part of this movie to me was the focus on like government bureaucracy, and that kind of, I mean, we're getting to the end, but it's like there's no big conspiracy. It's literally just like red tape and laziness. And I thought that like to make that the villain, or like, you know, even like the villain Wilson, like he's just kind of a idiot. Like there's no like, I think another movie would have made it a mad scientist or some kind of experiment gone wrong. And I thought it was very interesting to really just make it, you know, incompetence, which I think has a lot of resonance today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like incompetence. It's a combination of like incompetence and also kind of disregard for safety of like certain residents. You know, it's like this idea that like this lack of care that like Josh actually mentioned a couple episodes ago. It's not just like a lack of caring for somebody, but it's also just like not caring in the first place. It's like kind of by necessity. Like if you live in New York City or any kind of like city with like a ton of people jammed together, you kind of have to at some point not give a fuck about like a homeless person, for example, because like you don't have the resources to like care actually about every single person you see, because you see like 10 people a day who like need dire help. But then like, and taking that sort of predicament to a larger scale, like a government official deciding what to do with this, like this toxic waste. And we're kind of getting to the plot a little bit already, but deciding what to do with this toxic waste and being like, oh, we're gonna just throw it in the subways, knowing or not knowing that there are like people living down there, you know, and like not caring enough and also not having the bureaucratic tools to like have another option for that.
Yeah, like considering the mutants or the chuds themselves, right? There's also a sense of being beyond help, right? Like the further and further along you go down the line of being dispossessed and being sort of subjected to I don't know, the laziness of the bureaucracy, and you're subjected to the ills of society, you become less, I don't know, helpable. Like, I don't know what that word would be, but
Yeah.
it's like now that they are the chuds, no one can do anything. They are the enemy of everyone, the good guys, the bad guys. They're like a third party and become maybe a part of the environment now, which is interesting as well.
Yeah. And that Victor, who's the homeless man who at the beginning he's like basically the person you most feel for, becomes, I guess, a chud or some like
Right.
weird interim, chud spectrum. He's getting further on the spectrum towards chud. And yeah, I hadn't thought about that specifically, but I think that's really true. It's so much of the movie is about like who is in the scope of the police, of the government, of society, and also of our care as an audience,
Right.
Definitely, I feel like, I mean, so much a lot of what I took from this movie is like, I think there's so much depth happening that almost feels unconscious. Of like, I think the filmmakers feel like they might not be thinking about any of this, but I think that's what makes it kind of interesting too, is like, where do their biases lie as well?
Yeah, it's like, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of hard to even phrase. It's hard to like keep it all in your head because like they're it's like they seem to be trying to make some kind of vague political gesture, some kind of like, populist, like we should care about homeless people, we should care about these things. But they enact kind of the same kind of like retreat of this care, that the government officials do in the universe of the film. But maybe like as a way into this, let's go through these like three, because it's told through three protagonists in sort of this attempt to maybe like hit it from several different angles. These themes that these filmmakers are interested in.
One other thing before we jump into the plot, I also thought was interesting. Like, I was just reading a lot about like the making of this movie and the fact that the director never made another movie, or maybe made one, and like basically fell away. And there was a great quote where they said it was just our friends. Like, it was like truly this like group of New York friends putting together a low budget horror movie. And I thought that it softened me on some of the things I didn't like about the movie, because I was just kind of like, oh, this was just like actors in New York like throwing this thing together, which was interesting.
That is kind of fun. I do like that sort of DIY almost quality. I mean, it's not the like the effects and stuff are kind of fun, but they're all kind of like silly,
Yeah.
And then also some of the you see some props disappearing and reappearing and stuff. There's some some amateurish quality to the movie. Yeah, but I mean, we love that. It's great. Do you have any other? But then there's like a series of CHUDs that came out. There's like another one that followed it, and I think maybe one more or something. But
I think
Bud the Chud.
Bud the Chud.
Bud the Chud, and then also like we were saying, like it has such a lasting sort of influence. It's almost like a subterranean influence, like on the culture, like. I've never heard of like CHUD really. Like I haven't really heard of the movie that, like no one's really told me about it,
Yeah.
But like the vocabulary from it and sort of the just references, like it was referenced, Lucas, you were saying in the first scene of Us by the Jordan Peele movie, which I didn't realize, but like it has
the first shot of Us is a VHS copy of CHUD, and I think there's not a huge amount, but a lot of people have made a lot of the connections between that film and this film, and I think you can make that broadly. Like you look across this concept of the subterranean world or the subterranean monster or the killer in the subways, and I feel like so much of it comes from this movie.
For sure. So we have three protagonists. There's the first one that we see, sort of the main protagonist is is George, and he is this photographer. Just kind of like a Joe Schmo looking guy. He's kind of like lovable. He's like a lovable dirtbag kind of. The first scenes that we see of him, he's like avoiding his agent or or whatever, who's like, we gotta get these photos in for this thing. Like, I can't write the piece if you don't give me the fucking photos. And he's like, yeah, motherfucker, keep talking, I don't care. And then he's got like this like beautiful girlfriend who's like trying to do a like photo shoot that he was supposed to be taking pictures of, and he's like, I don't want to fucking do this thing, like, don't make me do this. But then he does, and while he's there, he's like giving everyone a bunch of snark about like no, I hate doing this. It's not because she's new, not because she's like being all sexy. I don't like doing this because like she's wearing fur and for this stupid corporation, and like they're making all this money off her. So it's kind of this like snooty, kind of like vaguely leftist, kind of like liberal, but also like lazy a figure that I think is familiar to me. Like, I can't help but see a bit of myself in that. It's like he's like not a great person emotionally to be around, and he's like, it takes a lot for him to even take those fucking pictures. But his project that he had done previously, we're introduced to him through, is this project of photographing the homeless. Which, again, I also see some, like, familiarity there with myself. Because it's, like, it takes me all I can do to, like, get off the fucking couch and, like, record a podcast or, like, write an essay. And then, like, when I do, it's like, oh, I'm interested in Palestine. I'm interested in like homeless people. I'm interested in things about like empathy and political action. But I'm not doing. I'm just like making. I'm just riffing off of it for my own gain in some way. You know. Do you guys have anything else to add about George? The way that we're introduced to him.
I thought he was such a fascinating protagonist because both for all the reasons you're saying of like. He did feel like a character I recognized from actually being in art spaces. And, like, he is such a, like... I mean, I don't think he read as kind of a prick to me. I mean, it's not like, you know, it's just kind of like... It's just silly to have a protagonist whose entire, you know, basically how we know him is, like, wanting to chill at home with his hot girlfriend. Like, that's, like, his only, like, you know, drive. But I also think it's because, like, he doesn't really have that much to do with the plot. Like, you could have this movie without him. And so I kept thinking it's interesting, why was he included? Like, what, as we get further into the movie, I think thinking about, like, why is this photographer character our viewpoint? When actually, you know, the action of the movie is driven by the other two characters.
Yeah, like, I also didn't like him, and I was wondering how... how he connected to everything beyond maybe the like door in the basement or something like that. And then I also got the sense that, okay, so his project has like caught the eye of the, I don't know, there's that like kind of bounty hunter, like hitman guy from the government running around or something like that. And like people just made assumptions about the impact of his work before he even did any, like he was avoiding this project, right? And then they're like, oh, he's a whistleblower, he knows something, and they just assumed that this dude knew everything. And I was like, damn, I wish someone assumed that my work was great, you know what I mean? Like that it added weight to it, and that he gets roped into it, so he's almost like like a Bilbo Baggins ass hero where he just gets drawn into the action and then does some, I guess, pseudo heroics.
Yeah, but I do kind of appreciate that he's not really, he's not just an anti-hero, but he's almost like just not a hero. Like, yeah, he's like, and I feel like that almost kind of aligns with, again, like what we were saying about the film itself. Like, it's gesturing towards something, but it seems like it doesn't really want to fully go there. And I feel like that also actually is very American. That's very American. It's very 80s and American. That's very honest in a way. Like, that is like the subjectivity a lot of us find ourselves in. I think it's like we see something's wrong, we feel something's wrong, we kind of want to do something about it, but mainly we just want to hang out with our like beautiful girlfriends and like maybe raise a family or just like figure shit out and like, you know, be praised for our art, but we don't really want to do the art. Like, you know, I think it's a common subjectivity.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting too. Like, I think the movie doesn't fully go there, but it was also interesting. Like, Soho in the 80s was like the site of gentrification in New York, of these artists moving in. And, you know, I don't know the full extent of the like history of that neighborhood, but like, you know, my mom was in that neighborhood at the same time. And I was thinking about like After Hours, the Scorsese movie that was shot pretty similar time, maybe a little bit later than this. In like, but you know, what runs through it all is like this wave of artists who, in real life, basically, they all got rich because they bought these apartments in a warehouse district, you know, in the 70s and 80s. And like, you know, I know an artist that's friends with my mom who's like died a millionaire, not because of her art, but because she bought this apartment that's kind of like in this neighborhood. And him as a character of like the gentrifying artist is also very interesting.
I was just gonna say, yeah, him as an artist, but also him as like a member of the community. Like everybody kind of knew who he was, right? And I just remember this one scene where he meets Marv, officially meets Marv in the tunnels, and he's like, "You're George," and he's like, "You're Marv," like from the whatever church or whatever. And I thought like, okay, well that's kind of endearing, right? Like he's not just the gentrifier as we know, which is like we want to make the city the suburbs. He's kind of like trying to like weave himself into the community as well, which is, you know, relatable, right?
Yeah. And to give him some credit, he does the two things he really does action on is when the woman calls him from the police precinct, and when he goes to take photos, he actually like, so we do see him I think you're totally right. Like when I was watching him, like he's kind of an asshole, but also I was like, you know, kind of the ethos of if you have to be a gentrifier, at least engage with the community.
Yeah, I do think there's something genuinely like hopeful about, like, you know, I do see something that is a little bit aspirational about him. Like he does like have a cool girlfriend, and he does have like a cool art project, and he also like does casually, non-heroically just engage with his neighbors of all kinds, you know. It's a cool model for like, you know, citizenship, you know.
Yeah.
But I think similarly to how he he doesn't really approach the plot of the movie actively. It just sort of like happens upon him. A similar situation happens in some ways with Bosch, the cop character.
Yeah.
This guy is introduced as like depressive, you know, classic like cop, and he's also introduced as being bored as fuck. Like everyone in the precinct is seen as being like, okay, just like twiddling their thumbs, you know, being bored out of their minds. And they're like, well, what are we gonna do today? Like ignore this thing, ignore this thing, ignore this thing. And then he even asks like the secretary or whatever, like what kind of, you know, what do we got to look at? And she's like, seriously, like you're actually asking, like, do you want to do stuff? But then he becomes interested in this situation where people are disappearing like repeatedly from the tunnels. Like people are just disappearing left and right. And then he actually decides to investigate that. And we're like, okay, what's up with this? Like, why is he actually going for this thing?
But he decides to investigate that because his wife.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. Like he goes down into the tunnel to like talk to this contact he has, AJ, right?
Oh, I know him as AJ/Marv. I don't know.
Wait, did I have the wrong?
Well, no, he introduces himself as AJ in that meeting with all of the bureaucrats, right? Like the police chief, the guy from the nuclear or the supposedly nuclear plant or what have you. AJ is an alias that he goes by. Yes, call him AJ.
No, but yeah, he goes down there and like is talking to AJ, and AJ's like in the soup kitchen. He's got a dirty ass shirt. He's like all musty, and he's like serving up like this disgusting slop to the homeless communities down there. who he knows all by name and stuff. And I will say during the scene, once again, we kind of have not very deep representations of each of these homeless people. They don't really have any lines for the most part, and they're just kind of like being like, you know, performatively neurodiverse or whatever. But AJ is trying to, his character is like, you know, sees them as like brothers and sisters, you know, is like very much trying to not just be with them in community, but also like serve them. And then, you know, he has this back and forth with Bosch, the cop, where like they clearly don't like each other, and Bosch is like, "What are you doing down here? Oh, you're a reverend now? What the fuck? You're a reverend?" And that's not even meditated on very much. Like they don't really go into his like faith isn't really a topic at all that we get into very much. And he doesn't talk about it either. He's just very like he's a very like humble, you know, like preacher of the people kind of person. But then he's asking Bosch, like, wait, why do you give a fuck about this stuff? There's got to be something else. And finally, after twisting his arm, we get the revelation that, like, Bosch's wife was disappeared recently. So that is the reason why he is interested in this to begin with. So I find it interesting that both Bosch and the photographer, George, they like, are half interested in it to begin with, but then it's, like, something beyond that, like circumstance that kind of like forces them into contact with like the actual events of the plot and like actually really caring about it. Like they don't decide to care. They just like, you know, their predicaments put them in the position where they kind of have to, or like they do for somewhat selfish reasons.
Yeah, it feels like another place where it's like the movie, like I don't know if it's that the movie doesn't see deeper, because like there is this kind of incredible, it is an incredible commentary on how people deal with issues of like everyone's kind of self-centered, and for the most part, other than the kind of the reverends among us, shall we say, but you know, most day-to-day people, it's like until it affects you don't think about these issues. And like, you know, both of them are these weird heroes where it's like they're empowered because of their, you know, their privileges of being these white rich men, you know, in the scheme of the movie at least. Yeah, it's like very interesting. I found that quite like, it was like a good reveal, but I was like, I don't know if this movie knows it is a reveal, you know, like, or does this movie know the effect, or has it changed in 40 years, the effect of like, I wonder if at the time it would be more like, oh, that was his wife, that's why he cares. And now it feels like, oh, he doesn't actually care about any of these people going missing. It is a selfish thing, kind of.
Yeah, I see it being a little bit of like realistic cynicism for both these characters. I really actually do enjoy that, like the complicated nature of their like involvement to begin with, and their sort of like lack of heroism. But I think they probably could have gone, and like they show the cops as like being kind of slovenly and whatever, but you know, I feel like it would have been, yeah, but they don't even go, you know, it's like a very ambivalent portrait of both him and the artist, the photographer, you know, but they both are kind of ultimately like good guys, you know what I mean? And I always am someone who's like, oh, they could have gone harder, you know, they could have gone deeper into showing their shortfallings, like the shortcomings. But it doesn't seem like that's really the, you know, it's at the end of the day, this is a creature feature we're dealing with, so you have to, with three protagonists, you don't really have much room to spend much time on any of them.
Yeah. I read, this was, I'm stealing someone else's words, but it was interesting that I was saying this got a pretty bad reaction when it came out. Like, it's only kind of become appreciated as like a cult hit many years later. And one analysis of that was that it's a callback to like the cynical paranoia of the 70s. Instead of, you know, the movies that were coming out around this time were more like Friday the 13th, where it was like very clearly you got a bad guy, you got a good guy, it's fun, it's about murder. And that actually I do think this movie, I mean, I really loved this movie, honestly. And I think like, you know, for all its faults, and I think a lot of that comes from like, it does seem to have a very clear-eyed view of what it's doing, and doesn't even really make its protagonists into the, like, no one really saves the day. It's like, at the end of the day, there's only kind of villains and then people who can do what they can within the scope of this kind of crisis.
Yeah, I like going off of that. Yeah, everybody is kind of just an archetype, right? Like, Jackie, you were like, oh, I can kind of see myself in George, and I hear you on that, on all of the levels. Like, oh, the good-natured cop is kind of the guy that busts your balls but will, drive you home in a pinch or something like that. And then the preacher being sort of the person who's in the trenches always, helping everybody out, maybe considering himself sort of, yeah, I don't want to give him a title beyond like maybe an altruistic man, but yeah, that's I think I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie as like a black person looking at it, because it felt like it wasn't like a specific slice of white life in New York. Like I didn't even, it could have been anywhere, which is why I really appreciated that movie, is what I meant to say.
It's interesting.
Yeah, there's something very like American about it to me, like archetypal America, which kind of New York City kind of as a landscape kind of plays that role, I think, in a lot of movies like this. I'm also thinking about like New York City as sort of like a metonym for like civilization in general, for like America in general. You have like all the different sort of, we have a lot of metaphors that are introduced by New York City in like filmic and comics language that introduce mutants and sewers and like subways, and then like cops, and then skyscrapers, politicians, like this like low to high gradient. And like, that sort of metaphorical sort of like landscape language architecture becomes sort of like a reference point for people when they say like high culture, low culture, and then also for mutants. I just think that like New York City has played such a prominent role in developing this sort of like filmic or comics based mutant, whether it's like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or like X-Men or Gotham City, like all these different like superhero stuff, but then also with these like sort of horror movies where like the sewer is where this like disfigured evil starts to emerge from.
I guess just to add a counterpoint, it felt very New York to me and not American. And I lived in New York for almost a decade, and I just think like the theme of most places don't even have a subterranean world, and we don't have like, it was interesting because I'm sure it's a budget reason. Like they didn't actually shoot in a lot of subway stations, which I assumed that was where they were kind of going with all this. But I think like, I don't know, there's something that feels very New York specifically about, and also how New York was portrayed in the 80s, like in The Warriors or something, was like so much about the violence of the subways, and is kind of like the right wing take is always, like everyone always, like even Trump used it in the debate, was like the violence in New York on the subways. And I think there is definitely like, I see what y'all are saying about sort of, it doesn't feel as specific of the space, but I do think like so much of my enjoyment of the movie was it was shot on location in this real neighborhood, and to me it felt like so, it could have gone harder, but like so New York. And also I think what was interesting about it is that it flipped a lot of that, of like in most of the movies at the time, the kind of subways are this like these scary, I mean it is the same thing of like they're the scary violent places, but they would kind of associate it with the homeless people, with the people who, it's like, I think this movie makes an interesting shift of like there's something else, which we'll get into, but I don't know.
Yeah, that is a great counterpoint. I mean, it's kind of, I think it is a little bit both. Like I do think that the like you said about the specificity of sort of the gentrification and the like very specific time period of these like artist communities coming in and like doing certain things, and like the timeliness of like that specific type of cop archetype, the timeliness of that specific type of like activist archetype, they are very local, as well as they're very local. But I think, it's the thing where, like, through the specificity, you get these themes that you can then apply to, like, larger things, and that I think definitely do apply in more abstract terms, like across America's, like, hierarchical structures and stuff.
I mean, one thing I thought was kind of funny about thinking about this movie was, I was sort of like, you kind of could only have it happen in a major city, like one that has a lot of sewers and a lot of places where the underground meets the ground. Like, you couldn't make this about Minnesota, I don't think, really, or somewhere like that. Or it would just be more comical of like, oh, it comes out of this specific sewer opening.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota does have tunnels. Like, there are, like...
Of course, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the density, everything being packed together is, like, kind of one of the unique things about New York that I think does draw this mutant archetype out.
Yeah.
This is a quick tangent, but does anyone know where, like, It takes place? Like, the Stephen King... Because it's like,
I think it's like,
because I was gonna say that, yeah, it has to be New England because it's Stephen King, but that also brings me back to, okay, this is coastal elitism in my brain, right? But like, there's always sort of this subterranean area in like urban places, and I can't quite picture what that looks like in the Midwest or beyond, right? And but maybe just the fear of what's like underneath, whether it be creatures and or like the things unseen by society, right?
Yeah.
And going back to the city specifics, there's always so much going on that this crazy stuff is plausible, right? Like, it adds to the, like, when you're walking to the subway on the East Coast, wherever you are, or you're walking to the train or walking alone, you're like, it's a little quiet now. What's going to happen to me? It's maybe specifically targeting city folk. So I do take that point.
Although I also, maybe I'll retract my statement of, I think maybe there's an interesting thing of everywhere does have undergrounds. It's just we don't think about them,
And this also does, like, I wonder also, I mean, two more references to throw out there is, like, The Descent and The Cave. These movies that are, like, about wilderness, but are about subterranean wilderness, and the same, very similar monsters in both of those as well.
I hadn't thought about The Descent. Yeah, I love
and it's
that
like
movie.
And I feel like, you could have seen a pretty direct, like, connection there, like, in the way that these monsters are laid out. And then again, like Us, that Jordan Peele also, like, brings these kind of, but he does an interesting twist that we can maybe touch on at the end of this analysis.
Also, just a fun tidbit that I just Googled while we were talking, which is, I'm kind of shocked by it, is the Morlocks in X-Men. I don't know if y'all are X-Men
I definitely want to do a whole thing about Morlocks.
I love that.
Yeah. But they were published 1 year before CHUD came out, but almost concurrently. So it must have been while CHUD was filming, the Morlocks premiered in X-Men, or vice versa. It's like,
Zeitgeist
basically, yeah, it had to be, they happened at the same time. And it's just like, they're so similar in so many ways. I think that's fascinating. Because I was trying to make an argument like, oh, I think CHUD made the Morlocks or vice versa. And I was like, no, they're like the exact same.
They just were tapping in. They're both based enough to, like, get that same zeitgeist fusion. So, like, just to get a little bit further along the plot here, basically, there's a homeless woman who gets rounded up by the cops and is interrogated by them because she was trying to lift somebody's gun, like an officer's gun. And everyone's like, why the fuck would she do that? It's like, she's never someone who, like, she doesn't steal guns. She's a bag lady. And then, like, the good cop comes in and is like, she's allowed a phone call, right? So, like, she makes the phone call to the artist, and the artist comes to pick her up, and it's like, oh yeah, she's, like, a great person. She would never, like, what are you trying to lift a gun for? And she was like, here, carry these. And she's kind of like, she actually kind of plays the role of this, like, noble savage in a way. I will say pretty much all of the, like, speaking roles in this movie are white. But I will say again that like the mutant becomes kind of the stand-in for like any kind of like alterity, including like a little bit of they become the noble savage in a way. And like she's not a mutant; she's just a homeless person, but she's kind of like this walker between worlds, right? She's above ground and she's below ground. She's like, yeah. So then we kind of are guided with her, like the artist is guided to her place as he like walks her home, right? And she's going down at the tunnels. She's like going up into these little nooks and crannies where she has to climb through. And he keeps being like, come on, you're gonna make me go through this thing, like. But then he's like, okay, I'll do it. And then she navigates all the way through. And then indeed we see her brother splayed out on on a bed, just like suffering pretty bad. And there, and then the homeless people in this movie do have kind of like they don't speak very much, and when they do, it's kind of like extra kind of heightened or performative. Like they do kind of have a distance from the level of, in my opinion, like sort of have a more of a distance from the level of acuity and detail that the protagonists do. But basically the point is that like we see her like introduce her brother, and we see his wound, which is like this really fucked up like bite out of his leg. And so then that's kind of how we get introduced to this, like something's going on in the sewers and she's there as well. She's connecting us to it as well.
Yeah, like her character plus all of the other sort of dispossessed people, like they are, in my mind, the nexus point for like as the human becomes sub or meta human, right? Like there's this, like the fact that she didn't talk to cops, I was like, okay, cool, that's some dope shit. Don't talk to the police. But then like as she brings more of the community into thinking of the police as an entity of the state, right? Brings more people into the underground. They become sort of transfigured and welcomed into like what I guess would be like true society, so that they can actually see the problems of what's going on. And I think that happens with her, but it also happens later on in the film when there are two people drinking, like, and the cops pass them by, but then also so do the CHUDs pass them by, right? So that they still exist in this like liminal space, right? They exist in this liminal space between like society and where our supposed villains live, and I thought that was particularly interesting in the film. Or movie.
This brings up another thing I forgot to mention about the introduction between Bosch, the cop, and AJ, the preacher, which was that, like, there was a quote that AJ was like, apparently there's, like, these creatures down here that have been doing stuff. That's what they've been telling me. There's, like, these creatures that have been attacking people. But, like, when he first says the word creature, Bosch is like, creature? What, do you mean your friends? And he's, like, seriously says that? So, like, that's a very clear example of, like, this alliance that the above-grounders put between, or this elision that the above-grounders perform on the figure of the creatures, the mutants, and then the homeless. But then, like, we also see the distinction, too, because then we do at least see, like, homeless people being represented as, like, having homes, having communities, having lives down there.
It's also worth mentioning, too, the spectrum, because one thing that stuck with me was when the photographer is talking about his project, he talks about the above-grounders and the undergrounders, and they make a distinction between the homeless people who live on the surface and those who have gone below. So I thought there was a very interesting, like, talking about this, like, at what point do we lose, both do they lose access to the state, and does the state stop paying attention to them? The one thing, like, about that scene when you see Victor and his leg, I found it very affecting and very horrifying, and mainly because it reminded me of how many wounds aren't treated and how many wounds in, I live in LA, and it's like you see these homeless people every single day, and you're like, you see many who have wounds that look like that, where it's like, oh my God, you need to go to a doctor, but this is a system. And it just, there was this like true tragedy of, what are they going to do? Go to the surface and try to get help? Like, I thought that was very interesting. At what point do they have no longer have options?
Yeah, I remember like I got to know this guy in this like encampment that I was at for a while. That like in Minnesota, whose like toes froze off during the winter. You know, but then also I wanted to bring up this article because this movie situates itself in the issues of like homeless people. I wanted to bring up this like really beautiful essay by William T. Volman called "For Men: Keeping Company with Outdoor People: A Letter from Reno." It's like sort of some like
Boy,
yeah. Anybody?
I love William Volman.
Yeah, what an amazing writer. Like, but he keeps making this distinction between outside people and inside people, and he's like mocking himself and like really struggling with this like situation where he's like trying to write about homeless people to make an article so he can get like money because his publisher says he should write an article so that his like book can sell better. And he cares about homeless people, but he's out there in Reno doing like investigative journalism, trying to like get people to talk to, and he just is so aware of the fact that he's like using these people for his own art, but he also cares. But then also there's this thing where he doesn't bring them inside. Like he doesn't actually say like, "Hey, do you want to stay at my place?" And there's this thing where this person keeps asking him for blankets. And he's like, I don't want to like go. I don't want to like bring this person to the store to get a blanket, and I don't want to like go to a blanket. So I just give him some like money. Like this will be enough for a blanket. So like, and then he's like self-loathing about the fact that he won't even go get the fucking person a blanket. So like, you know, and I think that kind of that moment of like, where is the line where like you're like, nah, fuck it, I'm just gonna do my own thing. Because like it's not a bad, like it's kind of a bad thing, but it's also like just such an inherent quality of existence that we can't care about everything, and like even if you care about one person, there's only so far that you'll go for them. And just like the distinction between outdoor, indoor, above ground, below ground, these like little lines where we cut off our empathy. I just wanted to bring in that essay as like a reference if you're interested in like themes of like homelessness and this question of care that I'm like so fascinated in. I recommend it. For Men by William Volman.
I haven't read the essay, but I'm a big fan of Volman, and I was actually having this conversation a week or two ago about hobos, because part of Volman's thing is that I don't know if this is in the essay, but like he spent a lot of his life like going on the rails for like months and like leaving his family, and sort of, you know, one could say if they're cynical, he's cosplaying as a homeless person. Or I was talking to somebody who brought up that many hobos at like the classical hobo in the 30s were upper class or middle class people who chose to leave their families and their fortunes and like go on the rails as a way to find community. So I think it's interesting when you think about, you know, homeless as necessity versus homeless as choice. You know, I think it's, and to have someone who like aligns himself exactly as you're saying, but still can't give care, you know, when needed.
Yeah. I mean, it's there's a quote that I really liked that maybe it kind of ties this in, like, and I didn't know that history about Volman. But he mentions like, I am an evil person and I tried this on to see if I believed it, right? And then the thought that gave me was like, okay, if you say that you're an evil person, then you're trying to set like a border around yourself, so therefore you can have a very clear reason why you did not offer care in the dire circumstances that you saw. And it's a lot easier than saying I'm failing at being a good person, or I'm too lazy to like, you know, devote my life to doing something good. And like, if he's bringing himself, to use like, I guess the 20s term, like if he's slumming it, right? You know what I mean? He's trying to like cozy up with a group that maybe doesn't get as much attention in order to either uplift himself or like his art. There's something exploitative about that, but if we bring in the whole context of like how capitalism in America works, like shining a light on anything will bring resources to that thing. So it's like he's in a way just conflicted in what his doing his part might be. And then, I don't know, to bring it back to CHUD, it's like, okay, there are three people conflicted in what doing their part is. The preacher's actually devoted his life to doing this. The cop is pretending to devote his life to do this. Like he's very bored, disaffected, but is supposed to be an agent of the law and helping people. And you have this artist that's trying to help people, but like is kind of lazy about it beyond like until he gets those phone calls when he's like directly called upon, right? And so he's like, I must act because I've been called. And you know, then you have the sort of unified through crisis, right? You got the CHUDS that now you're like, we're all in this together. So maybe to try to put a bow on this, it's very interesting that like even the like self-criticism, like that moral conundrum that an individual might have when involving themselves in a community that they're not quite a part of, but are a part of either by proximity or otherwise, like it gets to the point where you create the nexus, like that morality maybe bleeds out of you and creates a better situation. Because now after reading this essay, we're going to see our neighbors differently. After watching this movie, we will consider, you know, those who we just pass by a little bit and maybe experience a little less fear, right, when we encounter them, because at least they're not this other, which is the CHUD. But
Yeah, I think that ambivalence about like whether you're a good or a bad person is something that I find really helpful in these sorts of questions, and that's kind of represented by Volman. Like I think that, or what you're saying, like you can't just call yourself an evil person because that's almost more indulgent and almost puts you off the hook more. But sort of this in between position, which is like just realistic, and I feel like that's represented in CHUD.
I also think I hadn't thought about this, but you could make a case that there's a really quite realistic depiction of like how political action happens in CHUD between the three characters, of like the preacher alone could not get help for his community, the cop alone could not act, and the photographer alone could not act. And you need the photographer as the documentarian, as the artist, giving the representation that they use as evidence. You have the cop who's able to speak with authority and to speak to the state, and the reverend as like the kind of political actor.
Yes,
it's interesting.
I really wanted to touch on this too. I think that is true. Like I think this movie kind of anticipates like what we would need, and like also you need the circumstance, because it's not going to be, you're not just going to have it organically come together, but you got to have like a moment, like a caesura or something. There's a word for it in like fancy political speak, or fancy like critical theory speak, like the opening. But yeah, there's force, culture, and faith. Like I think that's what we need to do, you know. But so let's go into a little bit. So basically, there's, you know, they start investigating and going down there and looking at stuff, and they find this equipment from the government, from like the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And they're like, okay, there's something fishy going on. And then, you know, the cop and the preacher go to like talk to the city council or whatever. Like this, like they like, and the cop is able to like twist and like force the arm of these guys to like let them have a meeting with like the mayor. And then like everyone's like mocking them when they're saying like, what, you're saying there's monsters down there? That's ridiculous. But then the preacher's like, what do you think about this? And he like is throwing down the photos from the photographer that they found that actually evidence certain like, you know, clues that something crazy is going on. He was like, I'm going to leak this to the press if you don't talk to us. So they kind of like force this confession from the mayor that yes, we've been dumping these chemicals down there. These like, and there was a nuclear inspection agency that had been going down there that had been lost or hadn't come back in like 4 weeks when they should have been done in 1 week.
I think specifically what I found interesting was the explanation given was that they couldn't pass a law to allow them to transport the nuclear waste out.
Right.
And it was sort of like, they did say there's like they secretly put it there and no one knew it was actually already there. But, it's interesting that the locus of why did this happen is that they couldn't get a law passed or like a bill passed that would allow them to transport it away. And it's like, I just thought that was so true to life of like these crises happen not because someone did an evil thing. Talk about you're not an evil person. It's like it literally happened because, someone bureaucratically failed to, if they had maybe passed the law or done something else, they could have completely avoided this.
Yeah, there's like the Hannah Arendt like banality of evil quality of this, where it's like, but it's almost flipped a little bit. Yeah, not only is there just like everyday actions that you just sort of happen upon good things. I mean, happen upon evil, like if it's presented to you and this is what you're given, like, but also this movie is kind of saying like it's also like good is also kind of banal. Like it's not like a noble heroic thing that you engage in consciously necessarily, but it's something that you happen upon, a circumstantial unfolding of events. But yeah, the evil in this movie, as far as the really comes down to like this sort of gridlock, inability to do anything. This politician Wilson has like bags under his eyes the whole time. He's like just sort of this like tired figure. He's like doesn't have time or energy for anything.
Also in that scene, I thought it was very fascinating getting into the CHUD itself, the acronym. So that scene with the mayor is where the first time someone says CHUD. And I think it's introduced on an official document first. And then Wilson...
Yeah, there's like a top secret file that they finally unveil to the preacher and the cop. Yeah, and it says C.H.U.D. on it. And he says CHUD stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dweller.
That struck me because when he said cannibalistic, that to me was like, oh, so that these are people that have been transfigured. Like you've already revealed your card, right? That there's a monster down there and that they are actually people, or they were once considered people. Because if they're hurting other people, then boom. That was the moment where I was like, oh, like you thought you were being slick with this acronym, but really, linguistically, you've shown your hand.
Yeah, that reminds me of how, I mean, okay, so, and we've seen, and at this point in the movie, we've seen the monsters a couple times, right?
I don't think so.
At least they're hands.
Yeah, we've just seen hands. We've seen them snatch ladies from the, there's a big emphasis too on potholes, or what do you call those? Sewer caps.
Manholes, yeah.
Yeah, manholes, right. People coming in and out of manholes, or monsters, and like hands coming in and out of manholes, tugging people down manholes. Cannibal. It reminds me of like, again, like this shadowy figure of this thing lurking down there, right? It reminds me of so many things, like crime in general, but that encompasses like theft and also like drug use. I think is a huge thing to focus on here, and things like that. All sorts of things in that area. How those issues too are sometimes seen by the right wing. They're framed as like individual actions, and also like let's not let the center off the hook either. By the majority of like political people, well, okay, that's not true. I don't know. There's a common. It's actually kind of interesting. I'm kind of like undoing what I'm saying as I'm saying it actually, because the right wing framing of like drug use, for example, is that it's like the individual's problem and like they're they are bad people for doing it. They're monsters for like, doing heroin and shit. But then the liberal idea about it is that it's a mixture of that. It's like we should care about these people kind of, and like we should be like giving them free needles and stuff, or like safe needles and everything. But also they're kind of a moral failure for doing it, like and like it's a problem to be cleaned up, and so like it's sort of this mixed kind of positionality of like, should we care about these people? Are they really part of society? Should they be like this sort of like tenuous relationship to care for these sorts of people? And I feel like the cannibal is a good example of that. Like it means that it is one of us, but also cannibal is also kind of a dehumanizing phrase that's been used throughout. It's been used interchangeably throughout colonialist moments for natives or whatever, savages. The cannibal is sort of this like it's another sort of thing that puts you both within and also outside of the figure of the human. It's like you are human, but also you're kind of not.
Yeah.
And I think this is where... Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I think it's interesting, too, that in the movie and an audience at the time, the term CHUD exists before the movie, Like in the trailers and posters, it's very clear that CHUD means that it's like that's how you get butts in the seats, is cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. And just like for the government, it's like that was like the most flabbergasting moment of this movie. It's like, you have an acronym for this? Like how official has this become?
Damn. Yeah. I mean, they always have a name for the other. They always have a name for, I guess, the threat, right? And I do like what you said though. Like now that they have an acronym for it, it's like, is this a national problem? Like how many of these CHUDs are around, and how many have you encountered and tried to cover up?
Yeah. And once you have an acronym, once you have a name, you can then neutralize it also as an alien force. Like, I'm just thinking, I don't have a really good example, but, it's sort of like if an epidemic hits your town, it's horrifying, but then if you just can make it into a statistic, people care less. And I feel like that was also here, where it's like, once you have a name, once you just say, oh, well, this is CHUD crime or whatever, or like Trump said, migrant crime, that's what we call all this crime. And it's like, you're making this insane amalgam of all these things to make it like this powerful thing that you can't touch, an official thing, when it's like, that's not real,
Yeah, the illegal alien is another classic, like something that puts, it's like another kin to all these different, like sort of like subhuman phrasings that people use. But of course, this movie makes it literal. Like this in this movie, these things actually are like basically they're orcs essentially. They're like urukai. Like they're kind of like orc zombies, kind of. But so I just want to say, like the solution that's immediately offered by the cop and everyone is like, okay, well, what we need to do is go down there and clear them all out. And like that's like it's like, okay, fine, you twisted my arm, everyone. Like me as the politician, like fine, I'll actually do something about this. What is the solution? Gas them all. Fucking blow them all up. So, it very quickly goes to that. The question about what to do with the toxic materials is not answered at all. There's not really anything that's developed based on that. It's not the atmospheric pressures that create these things. It is the actual things themselves that now must be fucking eliminated. And along with all of the homeless people that are under there as well, because like, we gotta do it now, we gotta do it quickly because they're coming out, they're starting to eat everybody above ground because they're running out of food down there. Yeah. So we gotta cap all the manholes and gas them all, everything down there.
I thought was also fascinating is, if you catch this, that when the cop turns on the plan, is not, it's gonna kill all the homeless people, it might endanger the city.
Right, when it's like, it might blow up, because like, that's the thing, if it's one little spark of down there, then it might actually blow up whole cities of whole areas
Yeah.
of Brooklyn, right? Is that what this is? Soho, sorry.
Manhattan. Yeah.
It might right. So like it's again this like yes, and like Soho itself is probably like less important in the grand scheme of New York than other locations at this time. So like we have again this sort of like the below ground doesn't matter, homeless people don't matter. Soho does matter to this person. That doesn't matter as much to the politician. And then like in a grand, so like in a grand scheme, we can sacrifice all of New York probably to save the rest of the world from these things if we had to. So yeah, it's like this
One could make an
quarantining-
analogy to Palestine, I think, of like at what point do people care? Like both people who are like, well, you could kill all of Hamas, but you're killing innocent people by killing Hamas. It's like this thing of like, at what point do we care about the people who are dying from this?
Right. There's also like the terrorist. Like the terrorist is another CHUD.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the terrorist is created because of the conditions that have developed because of our civilization. But now they're there. Like now there is a threat to us because like, and that is also true like of like liberal humanity. Like it is threatened by the drug user, by the like schizo, like deranged person. By the homeless person, because like they want to go have their lattes without being afraid of being like touched or harassed or like yelled at. So like it is a threat to that way of life. It is like truly a threat. So if you're the liberal human, like you want something to you want there to be some kind of solution, because like, and it's actually kind of a predicament. Like I said, this sort of liberal predicament of like, you want there to be a solution, but you also don't want to like kill the guy. Like you don't want, it's like. But this movie makes it neat because it's like, in a way, but it actually, we'll get into it.
I was just gonna say, I also think it's important. It's particularly with the like liberal idea of the CHUD, to use the movie term, is that we want it to encounter it and deal with it over there, right? Like we want to sequester it in a specific area. So like if we're talking about the drug user, it's like we want to have clinics so that we can contain all of them and like make sure that they're all dealt with, right? Like it's the more that we can funnel into this clinic, the more we can like understand where they are, study them, and prevent them from spreading what is considered their virus or whatever it is, right? And that was just the last point that I wanted to make, but you wanted to continue on. So let's go.
Can I do a quick aside? Because I've just been thinking about this. I've been thinking a lot about like, one of the things that I've been reading a lot about is like the new meth. Do you know about this? It's like a big thing in LA, and essentially it is an argument that I am pretty convinced by, which is essentially they changed how meth is made about 5 years ago into a thing that enables paranoia and schizophrenia like within a month of using it, where it used to be kind of a party drug, and by doing that they can create a bunch more of it because it's made from chemicals instead of from or different chemicals. I don't know, like something more industrial essentially. And essentially the argument that a lot of kind of I don't know what you call it anymore. It's not war on drugs, but like drug policy writers are having is essentially this problem of it is creating a new class of drug user who has fallen into actual schizophrenia in a way that is like unable to be touched by kind of normal liberal policies. And like in LA, everyone is very focused on like housing, which is obviously a huge thing. But there are like, there's this writer, I'm forgetting his name. I should have probably looked it up, but he has been following this for 20 years, and he's basically like, you can't solve this problem with these kind of liberal policies. And it's creating this like more existential problem of like, we don't know how to even talk about this issue, that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, as we come to these like as we come to these sort of like predicaments of the world we live in, this increasingly toxified world in so many different ways, there really is no easy answer to all these things. These problems are going to be the roots of the problems will be persisting as the symptoms of them arise, and like and then we have to deal with the symptoms, and then the symptoms create their own problems. But you know, I think this movie does represent that at the very least there like is no like, you can't take, what are they gonna do? Like, how do they, now that the toxins are there, what are they supposed to do about it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to the question of being beyond help, right? Like, what you're asking the question, like, what can we do? And the government solution is always going to be exterminate them. And then as you know, when we get to that scene with, what was her name? The bag lady's brother, is his name Tony? Victor. So what I'm trying to get at is, as we go deeper and deeper into the tunnels, the gas is starting to be released, right? And there's a ticking clock for getting people out of the tunnels. I forget who encounters Victor first, but I think it's George. George encounters Victor after getting the gun from one of the like people following him, right? He gets eaten by a CHUD and he takes the gun because he's like, okay, there's really danger down here. He encounters Victor as he's trying to get out, and Victor is in a place between human and CHUD or mutant at this point, and attacks Victor. Victor shoots him, and then he's not fully dead, right? He's got a double tap, and then it's like, okay, the conflict is averted. But then Victor's sister, who is originally George's friend, and brings everyone from the above ground down into the sewer, attacks George and knocks him out, saying, "You killed my brother," right? And then thankfully AJ comes and sort of like makes her disappear somehow, like pushes her to the ground, and she's no longer a problem.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not clear if he killed her or what have you, but going into like being beyond help, right? George is now confronting someone who it was once his neighbor, who was once a community member, who is now beyond the scope of any of the powers that be to cure him or bring him out of danger. He has become the danger, right? After being subjected to either the toxins or the bite itself. It's unclear. And so it's sort of like this triple betrayal, right? Victor betrays George. George betrays Victor, who's also betraying Victor's sister, and then AJ betrays. It's a series of betrayals that all happens in like 5 minutes. Like, this is a very small moment in the movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. That scene also made me be like, what is a CHUD? Like, is the bite an infection? Like,
right.
What are these things? And what I think was interesting, and I think some of it is budget reasons, it's like they don't really spend that much time with the CHUDs. And like, I kept being like, I don't actually know like what these things want. Are they hungry? Are they angry? Like, and I think it's an interesting place where I think the movie kind of lacks an imagination that is also kind of makes it more interesting.
So let's describe the CHUDs taxonomically and then go into it more.
Yes. Do you want to go
like
ahead?
The CHUDs, I just want to like, so like they're basically, they look like orcs a lot. Like they're large, very veiny, muscular. They have all their nails and teeth are sort of like conical, you know, like warped conical like claws and fangs. They're kind of sticking out in weird directions. Their eyes are glowing. And when one of them dies, the glow of the eyes go out. Their skin is like gray. It's actually really interesting because like their skin is kind of like this gray that is like whiter than like a white person's skin, and also has like a sort of charcoal quality to it that makes it kind of darkened as well, you know. So it's just they're like hairless, large like creatures. And also something I found a little bit disappointing about the movie, again, budget reasons probably, is that they all look basically the exact same. So, yeah. And I find that really...
It was definitely one suit they made.
Yeah, but I think actually I found that kind of interesting though, like if that is like, you know, It's like, what if they all become the same phenotype for some reason? Like, all the, some sort of like primal form that the human DNA takes if it's exposed to radiation or whatever. And like, I love how like nuclear waste is like such an 80s like thing. That just like, does like whatever you want it to do. It's like whatever plot device you want it to be. Especially when it comes to mutants. Yeah, but like, so they definitely bite people. That's definitely their thing. They do like eat people up. But like, the question is, yeah, like, and also there's something I wanted to mention. That like the preacher left food out at one point for like other homeless people. He's like, this is for the shy people that don't want to come to the soup kitchen, and it stays there like the rest of the movie, and it's like this hanging thing of like meat, so as to imply that the creatures didn't want to eat it. So there's little details about that are kind of interesting. So like they're basically like zombie orcs or something.
Yeah, they don't eat the dog too.
Oh
Yeah. They hang the dog, which is crazy.
Oh yeah,
crazy.
Wait, what? That's crazy. Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
and so this is actually a great segue into the other scene. Do you remember when AJ is like exploring the subterranean tunnels,
Yes.
and then he encounters like the collection
Yes.
of chuds that are like worshiping the slime
I
or
was
whatever,
so
and that. Yeah, I mean, you could go off too. I remember being like, "Wait, what the fuck? They have religion?" And like
Yes.
that killed me. That was like, oh, so there is some cognition there where they are actually like pursuing, because and again, they don't eat the child. They run up to the adults. Like, there's a scene where a chud is finally coming up from the basement
Of like
in
Lauren's house,
George,
the girlfriend's house.
yeah. The girlfriend, yeah, the house. And there's a
Apartment,
kid
yeah.
that's like threatening to open the door to let the chud in. But like he narrowly escapes, and then the chud continues to rise and go upstairs, which could be, like an instinct to rise. But then also there's a moment where there's a man and his granddaughter, and they're lost and they're looking for one of their relatives. They're like, hey, I took the subway. Like, we're trying to find you. He's in a phone booth right now. And the daughter or the child sees the chud come out of the manhole cover and then kill her grandfather. But the end of that scene is just her weeping as the phone is dangling in front of her face. It's like they're only interested in killing the adult. So there's some type of like motive there, or maybe there's compassion. I don't know. They don't explain this, but my mind went crazy when I saw that.
They really don't explain it, but they leave all these hints that can be kind of ambivalently interpreted. Yeah, the scene, there's like 4 of them surrounding this like worshiping, like sort of like bowing to this like, luminescent sludge that they're, yeah.
Also, yeah, I just can't get over the fact. I know it is a budget thing, I'm sure, but it's like the fact that they look identical. I'm like, what is making these things a specific entity? Like it's not mutants in the sense of they all are different radical, offshoots of a single thing. It's like each one becomes a specific identity, which is fascinating.
It's kind of it turns mutants on its head a little bit, because it's like they're mutants towards, it's almost as like they're not mutant, but we are. Like what makes them mutant is that they become, like one, like this like prime archetype, right? Of like, this like, it's almost like transhuman as opposed to subhuman. It's like this like
yeah. That's why to me I'm like, if they weren't called cannibalistic, I would not say they're humans at all.
Right.
It doesn't seem like they are a species.
We see this
discovered,
and we see this kind of thing articulate. When it comes to film monsters, we see this kind of thing more so in the terms of aliens. Usually, we see aliens that are like that have the same phenotype, that are like a bunch of people that are the same phenotype.
Yeah.
We don't, I think,
usually in these scenes like the Morlocks, or I'm thinking about Futurama, the mutants in the sewers, it's like usually the joke or the thing is that they each are very individually different,
So
again, it made me think of CHUD as a term the government has for some kind of thing, versus a all catch-all term for something that might live in the sewer that eats things. It's like, this is a chud.
And then like one more revelation we get when they're down there exploring is they find barrels that are labeled CHUD, and they find more files about it, and they figure out that CHUD doesn't actually stand for that originally. It originally stood for, in the government files, contaminated hazard urban dispersal. So it stands for a policy and a substance dispersal policy. It doesn't stand for the individuals, the little creatures, or the big, scary creatures. Originally, it stands for the policy of dispersing this stuff underground in the urban environment. And so it's this atmosphere that is the true monster, but you can't see that. You see the figured monsters. It's such an interesting fucking movie.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I had a hot take, which is kind of boring and annoying, but also okay. So, I think that like another form, like if the '80s toxin that can be the metaphor for everything that's wrong with the world is nuclear waste and nuclear, disposal. This thing we don't really know about that's going to like expose us to all the stuff and like change the way that we are. And this can be a metaphor for AIDS, for migrant crisis, for neurodivergence, for drug use. I think that today, like the current obsession would be like AI, the algorithm. Like the algorithm is the toxic force that unifies us all and radicalizes us in very specific ways. So like we all kind of get turned into today's version of CHUDS through the algorithm. And we see people act out these like crazy fantasies and stuff. And like we see these like orc-like motherfuckers who are like chanting, "You will not replace us," or like wearing pussy hats or whatever. They get funneled into specific sort of types of performance and like beliefs, and like their imagination gets whittled away by this thing, but they're still alive in this sort of like interesting abhuman way where like they don't have the same kind of, and this is a little bit, I don't know, I was just thinking that like the algorithm is kind of like the nuclear sludge of today's world, and it's like almost more viral, and I'm thinking about how like the ways that it conditions our experiences, it does kind of whittle away difference as opposed to creating more difference in some ways.
A quick video game tangent. And this is aligned with sort of whittling away difference. So as a response for Black people being like, hey, we need more hair options to customize our characters, they were like, oh, we've got it. We're just gonna give every like Black character option like the Killmonger hair from the Black Panther movie. Like every single video game has this sort of like fade into like, tilted over what is that? I guess a coiffed dreads or like locks or whatever. And it's so frustrating because you'll play, I'm playing Apex and the Seer has that haircut. I'm in Elden Ring and I'm like, what are my hair options? Like I want to create me. Oh, wait, sorry. I only have 3 hair options. It's either bald, fro, or the Killmonger. And so it's like, there's a conception of like, if someone were to come down from space and be like, okay, who are Black people, and they only have video games to reference to, like, oh, they come in 3 archetypes. They either have afros, no hair, or they've got Killmonger hair. So yes, thank you for letting me have that tangent. But it's like, I think partially like how we are beginning to see each other, like we're homogenizing our own self-perception, and even our avatars, and when we transfer into the digital world, are forced into like little corrals.
That also made me think of like, I mean, we've been talking about it to some degree, but like CHUDS also as a race, as like a racial distinction. And one of the things I thought about this movie was like, it would be very different if like I was thinking about the Reverend character, like if that was a black actor, like it would totally change the entire kind of meaning of the movie, or maybe not, because it's already there. It's just like in this weird all white space kind of way. But you know, I think that's part of what's interesting about this movie is it's like the CHUDS are both exactly the representation of like the conservative fear of like the other, like, you know, a race or a class, and also it's so much more complicated than that in the movie.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so this is something that I like about the figure of the mutant in this whole project to some extent, of like non-humanism or like transhumanism, whatever you want to say, is that like, what if we took the framing of the right, and instead of being like, okay, well, we do care about these people, but you know, like they are human, but like, you know, they're also not doing a great job of being, you know, what if we actually said like, okay, these are non-humans now, or like, but then also, what if we did care about them a little bit, or what if we did have sympathy for them, or what if we were in contact with them, or like what if we were them? You know, it's like saying like, it's like, and I feel like this movie kind of tries to do that. It's like, what if all the fears that the right has about underground people were true? It's like, but then they would also be existing here, and there would be a reason for them to have existed, and you know, I think that there's something kind of fun and interesting about the way that the allegory kind of like kind of takes off and materializes kind of that way.
And don't we kind of see that with the Victor situation, right? Like we do care about Victor. Was our first moment of empathy for like the underground dwellers, and in some ways we're being asked by the movie to not care about him because he becomes a threat. But I do see your point where it's like, okay, like let's just if even if they're going to give us names, we care about them. Like rope them in. Yeah, like this person that's, you know, schizophrenic, and we like are trying to avoid them. No, let's give them like love, care, and affection. I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll stop there because I'm about to go on another tangent. But it's sort of like this: offer them the status of one of us and see what happens.
Yeah. I would have been really curious to see where this. I want to like write fiction about like the aftermath of this movie, because like the to wrap it up, essentially, they do indeed blow up they blow shit up down there. They blow everything up, and the two of the protagonists are trapped down there, and they barely get out because the politician is trying to keep them down there by like covering the manhole with his car. But the cop is able to get him out of the way, and then he gets like knocked out. He might be dead. The heroes come out of the tunnels. Everything blows up, but everyone's fine. Boom. They survived. That's all that matters. Everything downstairs got blown up, but they're alive. Crisis averted. But crisis is not averted. There's still so many problems that are like just left to the imagination after this movie. And I think that's really interesting. There's a huge wide open space for it to be developed. Yeah. And so as we kind of come to a close, there was one more tangent that I wanted to go on about the movie itself before we, have kind of closing thoughts about the movie, and maybe tie it to some other things. But there was also like the one like female character in it, like the girlfriend. I think Lauren, I believe. She has kind of like such an 80s female character role here. And like I said, there's like no POC in this movie. Like there's two, I think, that like say like they're like random workers or whatever, like a police and like some other person. But there's one woman, and she has such a female character role in the 80s that I think ties to this what Donna Haraway was saying from last week's episode about this position of the female that is partial. It's partially human, but it's so like she basically has the side plot where she's pregnant, right? That's her whole thing. Like it's revealed like, so I'm pregnant. Should I have an abortion or should I not? And they have this back and forth like, I don't know, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. And they're just talking about domestic life. And then like while all the action of the movie's happening, she has the action, like her own action sequence where she's in this apartment complex, barricading the door to try to prevent this thing from coming up and getting her, right? This CHUD. But previous to that, we had a shower scene with her where the shower gets clogged, and she takes a coat hanger and tries to unclog the clog, but by doing so, it sprays blood. What the fuck what does that even? How is that? What was that? Like, it doesn't even make sense.
Allegory for abortion.
Like, are we meant to believe that a CHUD was like in the like pipes somehow? But it was also a very clearly kind of like an abortion metaphor because it was the coat hanger. It's you're sticking it down into the hole, and a bloody thing, and like blood emerges from it. So it's a very like, so, you know, there's some sort of like random themes of like pregnancy that were not like nothing else comes of it, like pregnancy and abortion and like just domesticity. But then also in that same sequence, right? She tries to barricade the door, but then the CHUD finally gets in, and then she tries to leave, but the barricade stops her from leaving. So she's kind of, I think, this like mixed hospitality with this thing, where she tries to keep it out, but then the reasons why she tried to keep it out, the barricade, are the reasons why it's now inside the house. This kind of paranoia about like home invasion and about cohabitation, I think it's very interesting in the context of this liminal, like, you know, inside outside sort of like above ground below ground sort of thing. But what do we make of this character, if anything?
And could we also not make the argument that the destruction of the CHUDS is a kind of abortion, you know, in the sense that the humans and the government created these entities, they're not taking responsibility for them, they've let them, you know, instead of trying to parent them or bring them into society, they kill it. And I just was struck by the kind of the weirdness. I really don't know. That was such a strange subplot that like didn't really connect for me. But I'm just thinking you could make the argument of like something about the subterraneanness of pregnancy and of probably femininity to these kind of all male directing team. You know, they probably were like, you know, oh, they're, you know, it is the human as the female as the, you know, other. It's like, you know, her own body is alien to the male protagonists.
Or at least the writers, or, you know, something like that. But because there certainly is like from the male perspective, like of like the 80s male white, you know, perspective, like the woman's reproductive ability is kind of like mystical, and also it's true, like that's where afterbirth comes from, that's where birth complications come from. A lot of mutation is the site of abortion or like ectopic pregnancy, or like a pregnancy that comes to term but in a way that the isn't viable, quote unquote. A lot of mutation in the real world emerges at the site of like birth. And also, like you said, like, absolutely. I was thinking about when they were having that discussion about, like, should we have an abortion or should we keep it? I was thinking about, like, how does this relate? And I think there are some ways that, like, this question of, like, you have this life inside of you. And it's, like, this question of whether to make this your life or not. Like, that is one of the most like, instantaneously life mutating things you can decide to do is, like, have a baby. You know what I mean? But it was also just, I was also wanted to mention that, like, she was really not given, like, the same, like, level of connection to the plot as the other males, but she was still there, and I feel like that sort of partial involvement just relates to the Cyborg Manifesto's kind of idea of, like, being partial to the main stuff. But, you know, I feel like she could have gotten that better representation a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
she had the best kill in the movie. But I only bring up that point because if we go back to the bite or what creates chuds, she was bit by the chud like when like she cut off the head,
yeah.
it bites her leg.
Yeah.
And so that was a moment where I was like, oh, is this where the pregnancy comes in? Where is this like how the sequel bleeds into? Because they decide to have the kid, I think, right? They're like, yeah, we're having a baby.
They're gonna go for it.
So right. And so like my brain thought of that as like, oh, this is how like chuds become like join society even further, right? Like there's also this sort of maybe like xenophobic reference there where it's like, oh, once you're contaminated like by, you know, interacting with the you know, unfavorable entities or people, you then bring it into normal like society, and that being like a potential danger is what I thought. But again, they don't really commit to that at all, really. And I'm pretty sure that Bud the Chud is not Lauren and George's child. No. But that was just like a thought that I had, like if it's vampiric, if it's like trans-salivatory mutation type thing. I don't know. It just, I thought that her like new life interacting with new life, so to speak, was that whole battle there. And that took place in my imagination.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's another thing that really sets up this like imaginative space after the end of the movie that like seems really rich for me. Like there's a lot there. Yeah. But it's like it's like Bella's like half vampire baby. Like it could be like a half chud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I was
sorry.
Yeah, nope. I was just going to talk about the explosion. We're good.
Oh yeah, talk about the explosion. It is 4th of July after
very
all.
Quickly. Yeah, exactly. So the explosion happens, and thinking about the spores spreading, right? Like that actually just is the toxic fumes turning into gas, which also seems like a threat to me. But like it's played out in the movie as like a resolution, like boom, the explosion happened, the chuds are dead. But then the camera kind of pans up and there's kind of these little like, I guess it's sparks, but it looks like spores to me. And I don't know, that just like when I think of horror movies, I think of that like cliffhanger and the proliferation of the threat, and those two moments like in the house and out of the house, you know, it ends with them like joining their hugging hand, like they're hugging each other. And then there's the spores flying out. Also, I'm getting a boil water advisory in my neighborhood. So maybe the chuds are coming for me.
Like as you speak? Like
as I speak, yeah. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Sorry, it's not visible.
I mean, it's no question that we live in an like extremely toxified environment all over the place, but especially in urban, not just urban environments, like everywhere in fucking America, it's very toxified. And I feel like that's another like that's something we've talked about in previous episodes as something that unifies you, is like the toxins actually unify you. That literally in the figure of the chud, but also just like the chud has the same struggle as we do, essentially, because we do have to share the same space. So, and we have access, whether we like to or not, to all this like toxified environment that we live in. So like, you know, that we're all going to be changed by these toxins. That's like a big kind of tenet of this manifesto we're laying out, which I want to read really quickly before we kind of like do some tying up of loose threads and stuff. Because Lucas, one of the concepts of this project is that we take this manifesto and we can like we change one thing or a couple whatever we want every episode given the episode's contents. So I wanted to read it one more so we can keep it in mind as we start wrapping up a little bit. So right now we have no one, not to, shape change in the mutagenic pool, and drown with friends again and again. So as we do start heading towards wrapping up, do you guys have any other themes you wanted to pull out of CHUD? Any other connections you wanted to make with it?
Can I just shout out John Goodman?
Yes. Wait, what was his role in this again?
He's a cop in the diner. It's his first
Yeah.
role ever.
He killed that shit. I remember. Okay, so
He was so charismatic.
it was him and one other. Yeah, he was like harassing a woman.
Yeah, and I don't think it had like almost anything to do. I think it was just part of the scene of the CHUD coming up.
And then the CHUD, because the
Basically.
CHUD broke in and ate them all.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway. Can he be part of the manifesto? John Goodman?
Of course.
Again. With John Goodman.
John Goodman. Lucas.
I guess
Yeah.
my first thought of something about beneath the surface, I don't know if that is universal to Mutant Manifesto, but something about like the actual physical space of the mutant is something I don't know.
It is
Underground
kind of
or
subterranean.
metaphorically
it feels
yeah,
subterranean at least.
Yeah. Of the earth.
Yeah, but then you emerge out of it. Yeah. Like, yeah. Also, Lucas, did you want to maybe talk about You Can't Talk to the Dude?
Yeah.
I do think
yeah.
that actually has some really interesting similarities to this scene of domesticity that we kind of laid out with Lauren here. And then also this question of this other just there. I don't know. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about this? This is a short film that I actually helped on the set of one time.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But Lucas has been working on this for a while, and it's not publicly accessible yet, correct?
Yeah, soon it will be, and hopefully I'll tag Mutant Manifesto for all you listeners.
Yeah, we'll send it out. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, it has a lot to do with this, and I think it's a different angle. But watching this movie, I felt very close to it, and honestly, my big takeaway was like, if I ever get any power in Hollywood, I would remake CHUD in a heartbeat.
Let's go.
I feel like you could take this and make it such a fascinating piece. But the short, in short terms, is a very similar setup to this movie, where a sort of gentrifying upper middle class white person moves into a non-gentrified neighborhood, and on the first day he arrives, an older Mexican man appears mysteriously in his house and doesn't speak and doesn't move and acts as this kind of other. And each time he kicks him out, he just reappears. So it's kind of a version of the CHUD without the kind of violent monster movie aspects. But, I think I actually wrote a statement for it that actually very much fits with this movie and, with this whole podcast, which was essentially where the movie came from, was my feeling of being in these neighborhoods in which I felt like the mutant or the outsider. That, going into, it was specifically about Ridgewood in New York, but I think you could say it about a lot of gentrifying neighborhoods across America, where it's like you enter into these spaces that are seen as kind of the other by white America, a Latino space, a black space, an indigenous space, and then you have this weird feeling as the white person in that space where it's like you are actually the outsider, you are actually the mutant coming in and sort of taking space. And I think that for me is what the short is about, which is also, you could make CHUD into that. Maybe it's not the movie they intended, but
yeah, from what I understand about the short, I was listening to take after take in the kitchen cleaning off wine bottles. Was this real, again, like this ambivalence of the guy there, who is like, is this like a spirit? Is it like a magical realist allegory for like white guilt? Is it a mystical guy? Is it like a apparition, like American Horror Story style ghost? But the way that just ambivalent figure, the way that arouses a weird form of horror, because like it's a funny movie too, funny short film too, but the way that just having something in your house, the way that like disturbs one. This guy is not like a disturbing looking guy, he's like a pleasant looking guy, and like and he doesn't say anything, but just the presence.
And I think it's about communication too. It's like, even with CHUD, bringing it back to that, it's like, if the CHUDs spoke, or if the CHUDs said, we want, you guys to worship the slime or whatever, I think it would be less scary. It would be more intelligible. And there's something about, for me, it was always this, like, in that space of lack of communication is where we fill it with all our fears,
Yeah, that ambivalent figure, like, you have nothing to do but just, like, sit with it in your own, like, deeply coded sort of anxieties just arise there, Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. We'll have to have you back on maybe to, like, talk about it.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I would love that.
I want to see it so bad. When does it come out? Or I guess
it'll probably be sometime near the end of the year that it'll be publicly available. Maybe for those of us on this podcast, I'll have a link for you, but to the general public.
All right. So let's see if we can make any edits here for this thing. I'll send it to the chat too.
The one edit that I wanted to pose is potentially nether-pool, which it kind of like is one word that takes us underground, like it's not an above ground pool. Like, hold on, shape, let's see, not 1, not 2, shape change in the netherly mutagenic pool and drowned with friends again and again. Because I was thinking nether regions, netherly I think also has ties to subterranean, but I was thinking maybe the nether in Minecraft, so that also could be just me doing a false word association.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the nether in Minecraft is also, I mean, a lot of games have this too. This kind of like, and also mythology always has this like subterranean kind of hell.
Yeah.
But that is like a cool source,
Maybe it's something at the top of the sentence again and again. It's like, like coming up from a below again and again, coming up from the something like that. I think
my only pause would be what I liked about mutagenic is there's some sort of like transfiguring happening. But do you think the nether pool like implies I guess shape change, right? Shape change does have the transmogrification, I guess.
It might be time to move beyond shape change. That was our original, Octavia Butler born seed, but we could change that to just mutate. Or we could just keep it and have it represent that.
I like shape change. I think if you take out mutagenic and keep shape change, it keeps the same vibe. It's kind of redundant a little bit.
Yeah, it's true.
And
I think the nether pool is actually really interesting because that means like you're shaping change like deeply, like in yourself, in the world, in the world, getting down into it, plumbing the depths. Okay, so before we go, Josh, is there anything you want to like plug before we kind of say this verse and wrap up?
I mean, let me try to plug something different from what I usually say. I think just stay safe. I know the 4th of July is out there. Don't lose fingers. Also, it's such a dumb holiday.
Maybe that's a mutation.
Maybe mutate.
This is a dumb holiday. And 4th of July we barely even touched on.
Right. It's such a dumb holiday. Like, as someone who's lived in DC for a very long time, left and came back, it always strikes me as like, this is the holiday where it's like, oh, if anyone were to want to destroy the nation's capital, you just do it now. There's so many explosions everywhere. There's one point one year I was on a roof looking out. I'm going to speed this up. The point is there's explosions, there's dangers, there's sirens. It sounds dystopian to be in the nation's capital. So just keep yourself safe. And I hope you have the day off. If you don't, salute to the troops who got to work. So, yeah.
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 The one thing I'll plug, I actually have my essay, which it can be found in Cusper Magazine, talks about the 4th of July briefly. I mean, that's part of, I think there is a dystopic kind of like charged feeling of the 4th, you know? But you can find it on Cusper Magazine Substack. Again, like Lucas is one of the editors of Cusper Magazine. It's really cool. It's like essays, short narratives, art and stuff. But you can find it on their Substack if you look them up on Instagram or whatever. Just like look them up online.
Yeah.
Lucas, is there anything else you wanted to plug in there?
Cusper Mag, look us up. You Can't Talk to the Dude coming soon. I feel like that covers it. Submit. When does this come out?
Like tomorrow or the next day.
Okay, submit to
Cusper. Again, like go to if you are any kind of writer or artist, like the prompt is trash and treasure this time around. So look up Cusper Magazine and hit us up, or hit them up. All right. Well, Lucas, thank you for coming on. It's been so nice to have your filmic knowledge and your generosity with this really interesting movie, man. It's been really fun to go through with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is a great project. I'm honored to be part of the manifesto in a small way.
Thank you. I would also love to have you back on. Like I've been saying, this is partially just an excuse to have these formulated discussions with people I really love talking to, so I'm sure the mutant listeners will perhaps meet Lucas in another time and place and potentially a new form even at some point. But should we just kind of I kind of like us all just saying the thing chaotically together as we clock out here.
Awesome.
All right. No one, not two.
Not two.
Shape change.
change
in the
in
nether-pool. And drown with friends.
To arise
anew again and again.
Again and again.